In a quiet cul-de-sac where property lines were long settled, one neighbor's entitlement detonated like a firecracker, launching a battle of cones, surveys, and consequences no one saw coming. Let me start from beginning. The neighborhood had always felt like the kind of place where minor disputes ended with a shrug, a handshake, or a plate of cookies. That illusion shattered the morning the cones appeared. Two neon orange sentinels standing confidently on the edge of my driveway, as if they had materialized overnight to guard some sacred ground. For a moment, I wondered if the city had left them, or if some repair had been scheduled without notice. But then I spotted a laminated sign taped to one cone. Reserved parking, property of Lot 8. Lot 8 belonged to Karen. Her reputation preceded her. She was the unofficial hall monitor of the HOA, an unappointed guardian of shrub height, mailbox uniformity, and trash bin placement. But until that morning she had never targeted me directly. Apparently, that grace period was over. She had decided, without warning, vote, or even the courtesy of a passive-aggressive email, that part of my driveway belonged to her. It wasn't a subtle claim. It was loud, bright, and laminated. As I stood there staring at the cones, it felt like the street itself was watching. Curtains twitched. A neighbor walking a dog slowed down, did a double-take, and kept moving as if refusing to be associated with the spectacle. The cones were absurd. So absurd that I almost laughed. But entitlement rarely stopped at absurdity. Something in the placement felt deliberate. Karen hadn't just lined them up at the very edge. She'd positioned them a full 3 feet into my driveway, effectively shrinking my parking space and creating an invisible line she undoubtedly believed I would abide by. The asphalt beneath the cones was worn in the exact pattern of my car's tires, a detail she had either ignored or gleefully exploited. The first confrontation happened indirectly. Instead of approaching me, she marched up and down the sidewalk that afternoon like a foreman inspecting a job site, watching to see if I dared move the cones. When I backed out of my driveway, maneuvering awkwardly around her little territorial markers, she stood on the curb with her arms crossed, head tilted, wearing the sort of triumphant, smug expression usually reserved for courtroom victories or reality TV finales. From that moment, the escalation began. Every day, the cones gained additional accessories. First tape, then a rope between them, then a fresh coat of reflective paint, as if she was fortifying a border against invasion. The HOA, unsurprisingly, was no help. They sent a message saying they would review community concerns in the next monthly meeting, which was HOA speak for do nothing and hope the problem goes away. But I wasn't about to surrender my own driveway to a woman whose entire personality seemed built on enforcing imaginary rules. Before taking my next step, I started reviewing the old paperwork that came with the house. The plat map, the deed, the survey from when the previous owners bought it. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The driveway was unequivocally mine, down to the inch. But I knew Karen would never accept papers from the previous owner. She needed something she couldn't deny, something official, recent, and indisputable. That's when the idea formed. A fresh land survey. Surveyors arrived early one weekday morning with measuring equipment, markers, and clipboards. Their presence was like blood in the water. Karen emerged instantly, marching down her driveway in house slippers and a robe, demanding to know what was happening. The surveyors politely ignored her questions, which only agitated her more. She hovered around them like a fruit fly around a picnic, craning her neck to see their measurements, muttering under her breath, and occasionally, accidentally, stepping across their equipment lines. Hours later, when they finished and packed their gear, Karen found herself excluded from the final discussion. The lead surveyor handed me a newly stamped, officially certified report. The results were exactly what I expected. Not only was my driveway clearly on my property, but the survey revealed Karen's flower bed actually encroached onto my land by nearly 18 inches. She hadn't just been wrong. She had been wrong in a way that inconvenienced her far more than her cones ever inconvenienced me. The moment Karen noticed the surveyors leaving, she rushed over again, ready to declare victory or file a complaint. But I simply thanked the surveyors and went back inside, letting the new reality sink in on its own. Her cones still stood in my driveway, a bold, bright reminder of her certainty. And now, armed with the truth and documentation far beyond her ability to contest, I began planning the next step, a step she would never see coming. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 will continue with the fallout from the survey and the beginning of the petty revenge. The morning after the survey, the neighborhood hummed with curiosity. People pretended to take out trash or retrieve mail they'd already collected just to glance toward my house. They were waiting to see what would happen next, whether Karen would claim victory or collapse under the weight of evidence. The cones remained stubbornly in place, but Karen's confidence had cracks. She hovered around her yard more than usual, glancing nervously at my front door each time she ventured outside. The survey report had clearly unsettled her, even if she hadn't yet seen the contents. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an immediate confrontation. I let the silence work against her. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, she was pacing her driveway, stopping every few minutes to examine imaginary property lines like she was trying to visualize new borders into existence. She knew. She had felt the shift. Entitlement senses danger the same way an injured animal smells blood in the air. The HOA didn't stay quiet either. News of the survey reached them, likely through neighbors who had witnessed her meltdown the day of. They sent a polite but firm message requesting clarification regarding the cones and any disputes over property boundaries. For the first time, the HOA actually seemed concerned. That's when I put my plan into motion. The first step was subtle. I removed the cones while Karen was gone. I didn't damage them or toss them out. I simply placed them neatly by her garage door, as if returning borrowed items. When she pulled into her driveway and saw them waiting for her, confusion rippled across her face. She stormed to my front door and knocked with more force than necessary. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched from a window as she huffed, paced, and eventually shouted through the door that the cones were on her property, and therefore needed to remain where she placed them. Silence met her again. Neighbors watched from their windows. Someone recorded from behind a curtain. With no response and a growing audience, Karen eventually retreated, dragging the cones back to my driveway like a toddler reclaiming a stolen toy. But before placing them down, she hesitated. She needed justification now, not just ego. The next morning, I delivered that justification. I printed out the survey results, highlighted the clear property lines, and attached a small note. Please remove your belongings from my land within 48 hours. I placed the packet directly on her porch where she would find it immediately. The reaction was instant and spectacular. Karen marched across her yard clutching the papers as though they were radioactive. Her face flushed with indignation as she read the highlighted portions over and over, searching for loopholes. But there were none. Every line, every measurement, every stamp was official and precise. Within an hour, she was on the phone with the HOA, gesturing wildly as she spoke. Her voice carried across the cul-de-sac in sharp bursts. Whatever she said, the HOA did not agree. I watched from inside as her expression shifted from anger to disbelief to reluctant resignation. The cones vanished by sunset. But the survey's revelation about her encroaching flower bed lingered, and she knew it. Her landscaping extended 18 inches into my property, technically a violation requiring immediate correction. And while I had no intention of forcing her to dig it up, the opportunity to turn her own pettiness against her was too perfect to ignore. So I filed a formal encroachment complaint with the HOA, complete with the survey documentation. It was a simple, procedural form, the type Karen often weaponized against others. This time, she would be on the receiving end. The HOA reviewed it quickly. By week's end, a notice appeared on her door. She was required to remove the encroaching flower bed within 30 days, or face escalating fines. The neighborhood buzzed with fascination. Karen, usually the first to celebrate rule enforcement, now found herself fighting the very system she upheld. She spent hours arguing with board members, appealing to neighbors, even trying to claim the survey was inaccurate. But numbers and boundaries don't bend to ego. Her flower bed, her pride and joy, had to go. Watching her dismantle it was a study in poetic justice. Each shovel of soil removed seemed to deflate her more. The woman who once paraded through the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff now avoided eye contact with anyone passing by. But the story wasn't over. The survey had given me one more idea, a final touch of petty revenge that would permanently remind her not to challenge boundaries, literal or otherwise. And I knew exactly when to execute it. Once the flower bed was removed and Karen's outrage simmered into a quiet, festering resentment, the cul-de-sac slipped into a calm that felt almost unfamiliar. The cones were gone. The driveway dispute had been shut down permanently, and the HOA had, in an unprecedented twist, sided fully with me. But there was still one piece left to play. During the survey, the team had shared an interesting detail. My property extended several inches farther than the original plat map indicated. Not just into the area where Karen's flower bed encroached, but along the entire shared boundary. It wasn't enough to change anything major, but it was enough to give me an idea. A very petty, perfectly legal, HOA-approved idea. I decided to install a decorative border, small stone markers set precisely along the true boundary line. Tasteful, neat, completely within the guidelines, but positioned in such a way that they would visually communicate, every time Karen stepped outside, exactly where her property ended and mine began. The installation team arrived early on a Saturday. Neighbors emerged slowly, pretending to water plants or sweep porches as they watched the newest chapter unfold. The air was thick with unspoken curiosity. Karen stepped outside 10 minutes later, still in pajamas, her expression tightening instantly when she saw the workers measuring the line between our yards. She froze for several seconds, calculating, hoping, praying. It wasn't what she thought. But when the first stone marker went into the ground, perfectly aligned with the survey results that had already brought her so much humiliation, her shoulders sagged like wet laundry. She approached the workers, attempting the same tactics she'd used during the land survey, hovering, questioning, insisting on explanations that weren't hers to demand. Once again, she was politely ignored. By the time the project was finished, a clean, beautiful line of stone markers curved neatly along the border, forming the unmistakable outline of my property. It wasn't a fence, wasn't intrusive, and violated no HOA rules. Yet it sent a message as clear as a billboard. This is mine. Stay on your side. The neighborhood loved it. Compliments drifted over like dandelion fluff. But the biggest impact wasn't aesthetic. It was psychological. Karen avoided stepping anywhere near the border afterward, even when mowing. She would push her lawnmower in awkward patterns, fearful of crossing even an inch over the stones that represented her defeat. But the true finale came a week later. During the next HOA meeting, I submitted a proposal to formalize property line maintenance requirements. Essentially, each homeowner would be responsible for keeping their landscaping entirely within their legally surveyed boundary lines, with fines for violations. It was a simple policy update, arguably common sense, but the irony was delicious. Karen had spent years pushing for stricter neighborhood rules. Now, those rules were being applied in ways that would permanently restrict her habit of expanding her yard and her authority into places it didn't belong. When the board approved the policy unanimously, Karen visibly wilted in her chair. She could no longer push boundaries, literal or figurative. The neighborhood had grown tired of her self-appointed oversight, and now the rules she once weaponized had turned into her cage. In the weeks that followed, Karen became noticeably quieter. She stopped hovering outside during minor events, stopped glaring at cars that parked too close to her property, stopped patrolling the street for contrived violations. The cones never returned. Her lawn remained clipped. Her shrubs stayed trimmed exactly to regulation height, and she offered no further commentary on anything occurring within a 5-house radius. For the first time in years, the neighborhood breathed. I continued living my normal life, parking freely in my own driveway, enjoying the absence of orange plastic sentinels and unsolicited surveillance. The stone markers weathered gently, blending into the landscape as a quiet reminder of boundaries, ones that should never have been challenged in the first place. The best part? I never once had to raise my voice, break a rule, or make a scene. The truth, the survey, and a little creative revenge did all the work for me. And in the end, the cul-de-sac returned to peace. Not because Karen changed, but because she finally understood that property lines aren't suggestions, they're limits. And some limits, once drawn, stay forever.